So now we have describe gender. Yeah. Relationship between gender and language. Language is not just a tool for communication, it also reflects social roles, cultural norms, and power structures. The way men and women use language often differs, and these differences are shaped by the gender expectations, communication styles. Women often use polite, supportive, and cooperative language, reflecting culture expectations of femininity. Men tend to use assertive, direct, or competitive language, reflecting norms of masculinity, vocabulary, and expression. Certain words or phrases are associated with the one gender. Example: women may use words expressing emotion, care, or appearance. Men may use words and emphasizing strength, action, or dominance. Conversation patterns: women may ask more questions, seek agreement, and maintain social harmony. Men may interrupt more, give commands, or assert authority in conversations. Representation and stereotypes: language reinforces gender stereotype. Example: nurse assumed female, engineer assumed male. Terms of endearment or diminutives for women. Example: girl, sweetie can be patronizing. Influence of culture and media, cultural norms, family upbringing, education, and media shape how gender influences language. Media often presents women as polite or emotional and men as strong or rational, reinforcing expectations. Distinguish masculine and feminine traits and analyze of the causes of the differences. ਤੈਨੂੰ ਹੀ ਨਾ ਮਿਲਿਆ ਕਰ ਕਦਰ ਤਾਂ ਥੋੜੀ ਤੇਰੇ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਗੱਭਰੂ ਨੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਦਿਲ. Masculine traits are the assertiveness, independence, competitiveness. Here we can write masculine traits. Assertiveness, independence, competitiveness, rationality, strength. Feminine traits are the nurturing and caring, cooperation, emotional expressiveness, patience and supportiveness, others, flexibility. Causes of differences: biological factors, hormonal and the physiological differences influence behavior patterns. For example, testosterone is linked with the aggression and competitiveness. Estrogen is associated with the nurturing tendencies. Socialization and upbringing, family, school, and peers teach children unexpected behavior based on the gender. Boys are encouraged to be strong and independent, girls are encouraged to be caring and polite. Cultural norms and traditions. Societies promote specific roles for men and women. Example: men as providers and leaders, women as caregivers and homemakers. Media influence, films, advertisement, and literature reinforce gendered behaviors. Example: male heroes portrays as brave and dominant, female characters as emotional or dependent. Then we have the psychological and the cognitive factors. Some studies suggest that men and women may develop different problem having approaches and communication style due to experiences and expectations. Masculine and the feminine traits reflect a combination of biological, social, cultural, and psychological factors. While traditional distinctions exist, these traits are not fixed, and the individuals may exhibit a mix of both, challenging rigid gender roles and promoting equality. Explain the concept of sex and gender. Sex refers to the biological and the physiological differences between males and the females, and determined by the chromosomes, hormones, reproductive organs, and secondary sexual characteristics. Example: male, female genitalia, facial hair, voice, pitch, menstruation. Nature, biological and the largely fixed, not influenced by the culture. Gender refers to the social, culture, and the psychological roles, behaviors, and expectation associated with being male or female, constructed through societal norms, traditions, upbringing, and personal identity. Example: roles like caregiver, breadwinner, nurturing, or assertive, clothing preferences, speech patterns. Socially constructed and can vary across culture and time. Aspect: basic biological. So, sex is the biological and gender is social and cultural determination. Chromosomes and hormones and the gender is a society, culture, upbringing, stability fixed, flexible can change, gender can change. Example, male, female, gender can be masculine and the feminine, non-binary also. Sex focuses on the physical traits, gender focuses on the roles, behaviors and identity. Conclusion: sex is biological, whereas gender is socially constructed. Understanding this distinction is crucial for analyzing gender roles, inequality, and identity, as it highlights that many differences between men and women are shaped by culture, not just biology. Example: male, female, masculine, feminine, non binary. Gendering the language. Close the door. Will you please close the door? We have the socio-cultural training. The child starts growing. We train him or as per out of the social culture. Parents buy dolls and frocks for girls, cars and guns for boys. Then there are many do's and don'ts that elders start imposing. We expect the male child to be strong and brave. We cuddle the little girls. So the idea of the gender trees. Explain two case studies of the sexual harassment on women. Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan. It is in 1997. A young woman named Bhanwari Devi, a social worker in Rajasthan, was sexually harassed by her employer and colleagues while trying to prevent child marriage in her village. She faced physical and the verbal harassment, and the local authorities failed to take action. This case led to the landmark Vishaka guidelines by the Supreme Court of the India in 1997. Vishaka guidelines. The guidelines provided legal procedures to prevent sexual harassment at the workplace, emphasizing a safe working environment for women. Impact established a framework for complaint redressal and preventive measures, highlighted the systematic barriers women face when reporting harassment. Case study hashtag 2. This was the case of the Bhanwari Devi. Bhanwari Devi, social worker in Rajasthan, sexually harassed by her employer and colleagues, child marriage. The hashtag MeToo movement in India brought many instances for workplace around sexual harassment into public discussion. It was the hashtag MeToo movement. Okay, in India, brought many instances of workplace sexual harassment into public discussion. Women from media, entertainment, and corporate sectors shared experiences of harassment, abuse of power, and intimidation. Example: several female journalists and actresses accused prominent figures of inappropriate behavior, ranging from verbal harassment to sexual advances. Significance: exposed the pervasive nature of the sexual harassment across industries, created awareness about consent, power dynamics, and the need for the legal protection. Impact: it encouraged organizations to implement stricter and the anti-harassment policies, empowered a woman to speak up and demand justice. These case studies show that the sexual harassment in is both systemic and pervasive, affecting the women across different sectors. They highlight the importance of legal framework, awareness, and the societal change to ensure women's safety and equality. Explain different forms of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment refers to the unwelcome sexual behavior, comments, or conduct that violates a person's dignity, creates an intimidating environment, or interferes with work, study, or daily life. It can occur in the workplaces, educational institutions, educational institutions, public spaces, online also. Physical harassment involves unwanted physical contact or gestures, example touching, pinching, brushing against someone intentionally. Sexual assault or molestation create fears and threatens personal safety. Then we have the verbal harassment. It involves offensive or sexual remarks, jokes, or comments. Example sexual jokes, comments on appearance or body, requests for sexual favors, or obscene messages undermines confidence and creates emotional distress. Then we have the non-verbal or the visual harassment. It includes gesture, looks, or displays that are sexually suggestive or offensive. Example: leering, stalking, showing obscene images, sending unsolicited sexual content online. Then we have the leering. Creates an uncomfortable, intimidating environment. Psychological harassment involves emotional manipulation or coercion to obtain sexual favors. Example: threatening, blackmailing, or intimidating someone to comply with the sexual demands. Causes long-term mental stress, anxiety, or depression. Then we have the online or the cyber harassment. The sexual harassment conducted through digital platforms, example, sending inappropriate messages, sharing intimate images without consent, or cyber stalking, creates pervasive fear even outside the physical spaces. Sexual harassment can take many forms: physical, verbal, visual, psychological, and online, all of which violate women's rights, dignity, and safety. Awareness and strict legal measures such as the POSH Act, which is a prevention of the sexual harassment. POSH Act in India are essential to protect women and ensure safe environments. Sathin, she stopped in the village of Bhateri. This man who was in favor of the child wanted to teach her a lesson, gang raped her. Psychological, online, non-verbal, verbal, physical. Write any essay on the major forms of gender-based violence in India. So, chapter 11 is the gender-based violence. GBB refers to the harmful acts directed at the individuals based on their gender. In India, GBV predominantly affects women and girls and is rooted in the patriarchal norms, social inequality, and discrimination. It manifests in multiple forms: physical, sexual, emotional, and economic, and continues to be a critical social issue. First one is the domestic violence. Domestic violence is one of the most prevalent forms of the GBV in India. It includes physical, emotional, and the sexual abuse by intimate partners or family members. Women often face beating, humiliation, and denial of the basic needs at home, despite legal provisions like the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005. Many cases remain unreported due to fear, stigma, and societal pressure. Then we have the sexual harassment and assault. Sexual harassment includes unwelcome sexual advances, verbal abuse, and the inappropriate behavior, often occurring at workplace, educational institutions, and the public spaces. We have the sexual assault and rape are the extreme form of violence where women face physical and the psychological trauma. High profile cases and the hashtag MeToo movement have highlighted the widespread nature of the sexual harassment across India. Then the child marriage and the early marriage. Child marriage, often driven by the tradition and economic factors, is a form of the gender-based violence that limits educational opportunities and exposes young girls to early pregnancy, domestic abuse, and exploitation. Laws such as the Prohibition of the Child Marriage Act, POCM, 2006 exist, but enforcement remains challenging. Then the female infanticide and the sex selective practices. The preference of the male children has led to female infanticide and the sex selective abortion, resulting in the skewed sex ratio in parts of the India. Skewed sex ratios. These practices devalue women and girls and constitute a violent denial for their right to life. Then we have the human trafficking and the sexual exploitation. Women and girls are often trafficked for the labor or sexual exploitation. Trafficking involves a physical coercion, deception, abuse, violating basic human rights and leaving victims with long term trauma. Online or cyber violence. With the rise of the digital platforms, women face cyber stalking, online harassment, and the non consensual sharing of the private images. These forms of the violence intensify fear and limit women's freedom in the virtual spaces. Then we have the causes of the gender based violence. GBV in India is largely rooted in the patriarchy, gender inequality, cultural norms, economic dependency, and lack of awareness about the legal rights. Societal attitudes often blame victims, discourage reporting, and the perpetuate cycles of the violence. Cycles of violence. So, GBV in India takes multiple forms, including domestic sexual harassment, early marriage, female infanticide, trafficking, and the cyber violence. Combating GBV requires strong laws, social awareness, education, economic empowerment, and cultural change to ensure safety, dignity, and equality for women. मुझे एक्सेल साइज आएगा trafficking. How is gender based violence different from the other forms of violence? So, GBV refers to the harmful acts directed at an individual based on their gender or socially assigned roles, most often affecting women and girls. While all forms of the violence involves harm or threat, GBV is distinct in its causes, targets, and impact. Cause GBV rooted in the patriarchy, gender inequality, and societal norms that assign power and role based on the gender may arise from the political, economic, religious, or the personal conflicts often unrelated to the gender. Then we have the target. GBB specifically targets individuals because of their genders. Other violences targets can be random or situational, not necessarily linked to gender identity. Then we have the forms. It includes GBB includes the domestic violence, sexual harassment, rape, early marriage, trafficking, and online harassment. Other violences includes the robberies, gang fights, political riots, or property crimes, which may not have the gendered intent. Fourth one is the power dynamics. GBB reinforces gender hierarchies and the unequal power relationships between men and women. Other violence may not systematically reinforce social hierarchies based on the gender. Social and cultural roots. GBV is deeply connected to the cultural traditions, stereotypes, and the norms about the gender roles. Other violence is often driven by the individual motives, disputes, or the systemic issues like poverty and politics. Impact. GBV affects physical, psychological, social, and the economic well being, often leaving long term trauma and limiting opportunities. Other violence, while harmful, its impact may not be tied to societal oppression based on identity. Conclusion. GBB is distinct because it is directed at individuals due to their gender, reinforces inequality, and is rooted in the social and the cultural norms, unlike other forms of violence, which may be situational or opportunistic. Addressing GBB requires not only legal action but also cultural change and gender sensitization. What is the impact of the GBB on women? GBV has far reaching consequences on the woman's physical, emotional, social, and the economic well being. Its effects are often long lasting and can affect multiple generations. Physical impact: injuries from assault, domestic violence, or sexual abuse, chronic pain, disabilities, or the long term health issues, increased risk of the sexually transmitted infections and reproductive health problems. Then we have the psychological impact, trauma, anxiety, depression, and the post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, the loss of the self esteem and confidence, emotional distress leading to the isolation or the withdrawal from society. Then we have the social impact, stigmatization, and the marginalization in the community, strained family relationships, limited participation in education, work, and the social activities. Economic impact: loss of income due to inability to work or pursue education, dependence on family or spouse, limiting financial autonomy, increased vulnerability to poverty and exploitation. Then we have the intergenerational effects. Children witnessing GBV may develop behavioral and emotional issues, perpetuation of the gender inequality and violence cycles in the society. Then we have the conclusion: GBV severely affects women's health, confidence, social standing, and economic independence, making it a significant barrier to gender equality. Combating GBV requires legal protection, social awareness, and support systems to ensure women's safety, dignity, and the empowerment. Why does GBV occur? Wait. Economic, social, psychological, physical, intergenerational, economic. So, GBV occurs due to a combination of the social, cultural, economic, and the psychological factors. For example, the patriarchy and gender inequality. Society that values men over women often normalize control, dominance, and violence against women. Women may be seen as a subordinate, justifying abuse in the households or the workplaces. Social and the cultural norms, traditions, customs, and the stereotypes enforce rigid gender roles. Practices like the child marriage or preference for male children reflect systemic discrimination. Then we have the economic dependence. Women dependent on the male family members for income or resources are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, and we have the lack of awareness and education. Limited knowledge about rights and legal protections prevents women from resisting or reporting abuse. Then the weak legal enforcement, inadequate implementation of the laws against domestic violence, harassment, or sexual assault encourages perpetrators. Then the individual and the psychological factors, aggression, entitlement, or previous exposure to violence may lead some individuals to commit GBV. GBV occurs due to a complex interplay of societal, economic, cultural, and individual factors. Addressing it required legal forms, gender sensitization, education, and empowerment of women to challenge the structures that allow the violence to persist. Occurs due to complex interplay of societal, economic, cultural, and individual factors. Addressing weak legal enforcement, individual and psychological factors, lack of awareness and education, economic dependence, social and the cultural norms, rigid gender roles, child marriages, and the patriarchy and the gender inequality. Name some forms of the GBV. तेनू हीरा मिले है कर कदर तो Name some forms of GBV. So, domestic violence, sexual harassment, rape and sexual assault, child marriage and early marriage, female infanticide and sex selective practices, human trafficking and the sexual exploitation, cyber or online violence, psychological or emotional abuse, threats, intimidation, or coercion based on the gender, the forced labor, prostitution, or trafficking of the women and girls, cyber stalking, online harassment, or non consensual sharing of the images, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse within the family or intimate relationships. The sexual. Explain the issues of the gender and disability in detail. Chapter 10, Gender and Disability. So, gender and disabilities key issues. Disability and gender intersect to create unique challenges for the women and girls with disabilities. Women with disabilities face multiple layers of discrimination as they are marginalized both on the basis of their gender and their disability. These issues affect access to education, employment, healthcare, social participation, and safety. First one is the social exclusion and stigma. Women with disabilities are often stigmatized and socially excluded in the many communities. Societal attitudes may consider them as the dependent, incapable, or the burdensome. This exclusion limits participation in community life, decision making, and the social events. Second, the limited access to education. Girls with disabilities often face barriers to schooling, including inaccessible infrastructure, lack of assistive devices, and discrimination by teachers or peers. Families may prioritize education for the male children or the non disabled children. This limits future employment opportunities and economic independence. Then, the employment challenges. Women with disabilities often experience higher unemployment or underemployment compared to men and non disabled women. Employers may assume they are less productive or incapable, ignoring skills and talent. Limited access to vocational training and the workplace accommodations for the restrict economic empowerment, healthcare and reproductive rights. Access to healthcare, including reproductive and the sexual health services, is the often inadequate or inaccessible. Women with disabilities face neglect, inappropriate care, or lack of the information about their own health needs. Some may be denied autonomy in the reproductive choices, including forced sterilization or contraception. Gender based violence GBV. Women with disabilities are at the higher risk of the sexual abuse, domestic violence, and exploitation. Physical or communication barriers make reporting difficult, and legal or the social support is often limited. Then the perpetrators may exploit vulnerability, and the societal stigma discourages survivors from seeking justice. Then the lack of the representation and participation. Women with disabilities are often excluded from policy making, political participation, and advocacy spaces. Their voices are the underrepresented in programs related to gender equality and disability rights and the social development. Then we have the intersectionality, the intersection of the gender disability, caste, class, and the rural urban location compounds marginalization. For example, a poor rural woman with a disability may face more severe exclusion than a middle class urban woman. In the conclusion, women with disabilities face multiple intersecting barriers that limit their opportunities, autonomy, and the rights. Addressing these issues requires inclusive policies, accessible education, and healthcare economic empowerment programs, legal protection, and societal awareness to ensure equality, dignity, and participation of the women. So, gender and disability. Gender and disability. Explain the issue of the gender in disability in detail. So, the intersection of the gender and disability highlights the unique challenges. First, the social marginalization, educational challenges, employment and economic dependence, health and reproductive rights, GBV, lack of representation and voice, intersectionality. Explain the problems of the disabled woman with regard to marriage and family life. So, problems of the disabled woman in marriages and the family life. Women with disabilities often face multiple social, cultural, and the personal challenges regarding marriage and family life. Patriarchal norms, societal stigma, and misconceptions about the disability contribute to their marginalization. Social stigma and the prejudice. Society often perceives disabled women as the unfit for marriage or incomplete, leading to rejection or exclusion from the marriage proposals. Families may fear social judgment if a disabled daughter marries, believing she cannot fulfill traditional marital roles. Then the limited marriage opportunities. Disabled women often face fewer opportunities for marriage compared to non-disabled women. Potential partners and their families may hesitate due to concerns about caregiving, fertility, or the woman's ability to manage household responsibilities. Vulnerability to exploitation. In case where disabled women marry, they may face abuse, neglect, or exploitation by spouses or in laws. Dependence on others for mobility, communication, or daily activities increases vulnerability. Then we have the reproductive health challenges. Disabled women may encounter limited access to reproductive health care, family planning, or the prenatal support. Misconceptions about the sexuality may lead to forced sterilization or denial of the reproductive rights. Household responsibilities. Societal expectations often require women to handle household duties. Disabled women may face pressure or criticism if unable to perform traditional domestic roles. Then the emotional and the psychological impact, rejection, discrimination, or abuse can lead to the low self-esteem, depression, and the social isolation. Lack of support in the family settings can further exacerbate and the mental health challenges. Disabled women face significant problems in marriage and family life, including social stigma, limited opportunities, vulnerability to exploitation, and restricted reproductive and domestic rights. Addressing these challenges requires awareness, legal protection, inclusive family policies, and the societal change to ensure dignity, equality, and the empowerment. Explain the significance of access to education and employment for disabled women. Access to education and employment is crucial for the empowerment of the disabled women. It allows them to overcome social, economic, and the cultural barriers, promotes independence, and ensures equal participation in society. Education, empowerment, and awareness. Education provides disabled women with the knowledge, skills, and confidence to participate fully in society. It helps them understand their rights, health, and social responsibilities, reducing dependence on the family members. Access to education enables better decision making regarding marriage, employment, and personal life. Inclusive education promotes social integration, helping disabled women interact with the peers and the build networks. Employment, economic independence. So, employment allows disabled women to earn their livelihood, reducing economic dependence on the family or spouse. Economic independence increases self confidence and decision making power, enhancing social status. Work opportunities allows them to contribute meaningfully to society, challenging stereotype that women with disabilities are dependent or unproductive. Social inclusion and equality, reduction of the vulnerability. So, education and the employment help disabled women break social isolation and engagement with the community activities. They challenge traditional gender norms and discriminatory practices, promoting gender equality and the disability rights. Women with skills and income are more likely to participate in civic, political, and the cultural life. Reduction to vulnerability. Educated and employed women are less vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and discrimination. Financial independence and awareness of the rights empower them to seek justice and assert autonomy. Access to education and employment is vital for the disabled women's empowerment, independence, and the social inclusion. It ensures equality, enhances self esteem, reduces vulnerability, and enables them to participate fully in the family, community, and the national life. Inclusive policies, supportive infrastructure, and the societal awareness are essential to achieve these goals. Then the access to education and employment is vital for the disabled women's empowerment, independence, and the social inclusion. It ensures equality, enhances self esteem, reduces vulnerability, and enables them to participate fully in the family, reduction to vulnerability, social inclusion and equality, employment, economic independence, education, empowerment, and awareness. Define disability, social